They were soldiers unlike any others, before or since. Their nation was an armed camp. They knew no trade but war. In 480 BC, at a place called Thermopylae, they met an army 100 times their size and stood their ground. For them, the trumpets never called retreat. Their name has become a synonym for hardship willingly endured and death stoically faced.
If the city of the Spartans should be deserted, and nothing left but its temples and foundations, posterity would, I think, after a long lapse of time, be unwilling to believe that their power was as great as their renown.
There are few monuments left to the mightiest state in ancient Greece, for the Spartans were defended not by walls, but by their warriors.
A city well fortified, surrounded by brave men, and not by bricks.
Early in the 5th century BC, the Spartan defenses were put to their hardest test yet. The Persian king Xerxes, who ruled the greatest empire in the world, schemed to make it greater still by conquering the city-states of Greece. Invaders had long been drawn to the fertile valley of the Spartans, just as the Spartans themselves were centuries before. They were shielded, however, by their mountains and the sea. The true menace to Sparta lay within. Helots, they were called, captives. They were here before the Spartans, and they outnumbered them. But now the Helots toiled like sharecroppers. When a terrible earthquake shook Sparta, the Helots rose up. The revolt took several years to quash. Ever since, the Helots were kept in check by Sparta's soldiers, who went among them to kill the disloyal. Hostile to outsiders, fearful at home, Sparta was a regime like no other in history. Forever under the cloud of war, the entire nation lived like an army.
We have been superior to all the Greeks, not because of the size of our city, nor the numbers of our men, but because the constitution we have established is like a military camp, well administered and rendering willing obedience to its officers.
When the Persians marched on Greece, Sparta and its rivals ceased fighting among themselves. A small force, including 300 Spartans, was dispatched to hold off the Persians while the city-states organized. Among them, a warrior named Aristodemus. Like the others, he had prepared all his life for war, beginning at birth. Upon entering the world, a Spartan infant was examined by the city's elders. If it was not healthy and sturdy, it would be flung into a ravine on Mount Aegatus, and left to die. Surviving his first trial, Aristodemus was bathed not in water but wine to steel his constitution. Then he was handed over to a slave nurse. He would not be coddled. He was fed plain food and taught not to fear the dark or being alone. At 7, Aristodemus was enrolled in the state school, the Agoge. His life was now devoted to war.
Of reading and writing, they learned only enough to serve their turn. All the rest of their training was calculated to make them obey commands well, endure hardships, and conquer in battle.
The young Aristodemus was forbidden underclothes and shoes. Instead, he received a single cloak to last the whole year. During exercise, he went barefoot and naked. He was given no bed. He had to make his own from coarse rushes, plucked and twisted by hand. His diet was deliberately poor. To supplement it, he was encouraged to steal food, for someday his life might depend on living off the land. But if caught, he was beaten, first by the owner he had stolen from, then by his tutor for getting caught. At 12, Aristodemus began training with weapons: the sword, the thrusting spear, and the bulwark of the Spartan army, the shield. It was a simple metal disc hammered over a wooden core. The warrior passed his left arm through a loop to a grip on the rim. A line of soldiers so protected formed a phalanx, a wall of shields, where the right side of each man was protected by the shield of the man beside him. So important was it that warriors were told to come back with their shields or on them. At 20, Aristodemus faced another rite of passage, the privilege of joining a mess.
The messmates contributed monthly a bushel of barley meal, 8 gallons of wine, 5 pounds of cheese, 2.5 pounds of figs, and a very small amount of money for such relishes as flesh and fish.
For a Spartan warrior, belonging to a mess was not only a symbol of status, it was status itself. A man without a mess was like a soldier without an army. Still, the mess itself was as austere as the Spartans. A visiting foreigner thought the food so bad that he is said to have remarked, "Now I know why the Spartans do not fear death." In the mess and the barracks, bonds were forged that could not be broken on the battlefield. Training together, eating together, sleeping together, comrades became friends and lovers. No greater glory could a man seek than to die in battle for the one he loved. Aristodemus could now also take a wife, but marriage would not change his routine.
After supping at his public mess table as usual, he slipped stealthily into the room where his bride lay, loosed her virgin's robe, and bore her in his arms to the marriage bed. Then, after spending a short time with his bride, he went away to his usual quarters, there to sleep alongside the other young men.
Only at age 30 did Aristodemus reach the last stage of Spartan education. He was now an equal. For the rest of his life, an equal devoted himself to affairs of state and the art of war. He could choose to live with his family if he had one, but he could not farm or trade. Such work was left to others. The result, An army that could outdrill, outmarch, and outfight any other. Thermopylae means gates of heat. Here, where the mountains reared up from the shore, a hot sulfur spring flowed. In time, the sea would ebb and expose a plain nearly a mile across. In the days of Aristodemus, Thermopylae was a narrow pass, wide enough for only a single cart. Through this bottleneck, Xerxes would have to march. It was blocked by the Spartans. Xerxes sent out a spy. All he discovered was the Spartans scorned for their enemy and for death. They stood in the open, conspicuous in their red cloaks and confident in their arms.
There he saw some of the men at exercise and others combing their hair. Marveling at the sight, he rode back, unmolested, none pursuing him or even paying him any attention. When Xerxes heard, he could not comprehend the truth, that the Spartans were preparing to the best of their power to kill or be killed. What they were doing seemed laughable.
Xerxes commanded a huge army, 200,000 strong. Such a host, he imagined, would sweep the Greeks aside. He didn't know the lay of the land or the way of the Spartans. They could not only outdrill and outmarch their foes, they could outmaneuver them. Spartans fought in platoons of 24 men called sworn bands. Small, mobile, and fiercely loyal. Aristodemus would serve in the same band throughout his career. At 55, he would retire, and a new man would take his place. For this family of comrades, each man was sworn to fight and die. Girding for battle, Aristodemus armored his torso with a bronze cuirass. His shins were guarded by bronze greaves. Strapped to his waist, an iron sword with a curved blade, wider near the tip, where it pierced flesh. Their heads were better protected than most warriors by a crested bronze helmet that exposed only the eyes. Beneath it, their long hair spilled out, a privilege of veterans and a sign of prowess. Deployed in the first rank of the phalanx, Aristodemus lifted his short spear over his shoulder, locked shields with his comrades, and advanced.
Shield against rounded shield, and awful shrieks as they fall upon one another, piercing men's breasts with the spear. And not a bit will they draw back from the pounding of the missiles. Nay, despite the battering of great hurlstones, the helmets shall abide the rattle of war unbowed.
In the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the Persians lost their great advantage in numbers. Fighting in shifts, Thrusting their spears from behind their wall of shields, the Greeks repelled assault after assault. Enraged, Xerxes sent in his elite infantry, the Immortals. The Spartan king Leonidas ordered the unthinkable: retreat. The Persians swarmed into the pass, and the trap. At a signal, the Spartans turned. Against the spears of the Spartan phalanx, the Immortals proved as weak as their flesh. For 2 days, the huge Persian army was held at bay. Then its luck turned. A farmer revealed a path through the mountains. Part of Xerxes' army poured through it and emerged behind the Greeks. The position of Leonidas was now hopeless. He ordered his Greek allies to retreat. With his 300 Spartans, he would stand at Thermopylae against the entire Persian army and hold them off for as long as possible. In admiration, 700 troops of the city-state Thespiae stayed to fight alongside the Spartans. After the second day of battle, Aristodemus and another Spartan, Eurotas, had taken ill. Leonidas had ordered them to rest, but now the Persians were closing in.
Eurotas called for his armor and put it on. But Aristodemus's heart failed him, and he stayed behind. They now met their enemies outside the pass, and many of the barbarians were slain. Many were thrust into the sea and there drowned, and more by far were trodden down bodily by each other, none regarding who it was that perished. For inasmuch as the Greeks knew that they must die by the hands of those who came around the mountain, they put forth the very utmost of their strength against the barbarians in their recklessness and frenzy.
In the thick of battle, King Leonidas fell. The fiercest fighting now took place for his body. Their spears and their ranks at last broken, the Greeks withdrew to a hill for a final stand.
In that place they defended themselves with their swords, as many as still had such, and with their fists and teeth, till the barbarians overwhelmed them with missiles. Thus did the men of Sparta and Thespiae bear themselves.
All but 2 of the Spartans lay slain. The poet Simonides composed an epitaph for the Spartan dead.
O stranger, go tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their laws.
One warrior did not lie there, Aristodemus. For a Spartan, this was the worst fate.
When Aristodemus returned to Sparta, he was dishonored. No Spartan would give him fire, nor speak with him. And they called him, for his disgrace, Aristodemus the Coward.
The time bought by the Spartans was well spent. When the Persians again met the Greeks in the great naval battle at Salamis, they were destroyed. Xerxes' dream of conquering Greece went down with his ships. Aristodemus was a broken man. Fighting a year later at Plataea, he plunged into the enemy line and ended his misery. For the next century, Sparta was the most powerful state in all Greece. In 404 BC, it defeated its proud arch-rival, Athens. But for the inflexible Spartans, new lands proved easier to win than to rule. The state as armed camp, an idea that worked so well at home, failed abroad. By the 2nd century BC, Sparta was broken. The discipline that kept its soldiers from fleeing in panic also prevented wise retreat. Militant Sparta had made too many enemies and lost too many men. Sparta's great training system, the agoge, was reduced to spectacle.
The boys in Sparta are lashed with whips during the entire day at the altar of Artemis or Thea, frequently to the point of death. And they bravely endure this, cheerful and proud, vying for the supremacy as to which could endure being beaten for the longer time and the greater number of blows. The one who is victorious is held high in repute.
This was the legacy of the once proud Spartans.
Morzet vita duello, conflixerend mirando, lux vitae mortuus regnat futur.
In this year, dire portents appeared over Northumbria and sorely frightened the people. They consisted of immense whirlwinds and flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air.
A scribe records that in the year 793, marauders from the north crossed the sea to England and shattered the peace. Pagans in search of treasure, they surprised the defenseless monastery of Lindisfarne. For Christian Europe, the blackest hour of the Dark Ages was about to strike.
They came to the church, laid everything waste with grievous plundering, trampled the holy places with polluted feet, dug up the altars and seized the treasures. They killed some of the brothers, some they took away with them in fetters, and some they drowned in the sea.
For 300 years, the sight of a Viking longship made Europe tremble, for it carried a fearsome crew, the greatest sailors of their day and the fiercest warriors. From the lands now called Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, young men sought their fortune at sea. Some went in peace to settle new lands, some went to trade, some to plunder. In their sagas, Norse poets recorded and embellished the exploits of these seafaring warriors. Men like Olaf the Stout, Ivar the Boneless, Eric Bloodaxe, and Thorfinn the Skull Splitter. And an especially cruel Viking called Egil Skallagrimsson, whose exploits have been handed down across 1,000 years. Egil's father was from Norway, but having backed the wrong side in a dispute, he had been forced to flee to Iceland.
There was plenty of driftwood to be had, so Egil's father built and ran a farm, from where his men went out fishing and seal hunting and collecting the eggs of wildfowl.
Egil was born around 900 AD and raised in a small village. Just a few huts and longhouses. With his family, he lived in one or two windowless rooms, the air hazy with smoke, the walls blackened with soot. An Arab trader from a more civilized land was shocked by some of the Viking customs he witnessed.
Anyone who slaughters an animal by way of sacrifice has a pole outside his house and hangs the sacrificed animal there. I have never heard such horrible singing. It's like a growl coming out of their throats, like the barking of dogs, only much more beastly. If a weak child is born there, it's thrown into the sea to save bringing it up.
Egil was by no means a weak child. Like other boys, he played at war and watched in awe as his elder brothers and his father went off each spring to adventures Egil could only imagine and envy.
It soon became obvious that Egil was going to be just as black-haired and ugly as his father. By the time he was 3 years old, he was as big and strong as a boy of 6 or 7 years. When it came to playing with the other lads, he was a hard one to handle.
The saga records that at the age of 6, Egil lost a competition to a boy called Grim. The humiliation was unbearable.
He ran up to Grim and drove the axe into his head right through to the brain. His mother said that Egil had the makings of a real Viking, and it was obvious that as soon as he was old enough, he ought to be given fighting ships.
In Egil's time, Christianity had not yet worked its way up the fjords of the Norse lands. The Vikings still worshipped a pantheon of gods. Thor rode with the thunder in the sky, and Freya brought fertility to the land. These deities would prove immortal in the form of Thursday and Friday. Warriors charged into battle, shielded by Odin, god of war. A Viking who died on the field joined the fallen heroes before him in Valhalla, a feasting hall of the other world. There he would celebrate his deeds on earth until the day when he would fight and die alongside the gods in mankind's final battle. His destiny already ordained, Egil spent his childhood wrestling, dueling, and hunting, perfecting the makings of a real Viking. Egil impatiently awaited the first sign of spring and the chance to go to sea in a longship and go raiding. An elder brother owned such a ship. When he began to recruit men from the villages, Egil joined him.
In spring, they started preparing a big longship, and as soon as everyone was ready, off they went.
The skill of every warrior would be tested anew in the months at sea. Young Egil himself was embarking on a voyage that would change his life. The word Viking means men of the inlet. As boat builders, these men were unrivaled. By late in the 8th century, when the Vikings swept down upon the monks at Lindisfarne, the Scandinavians had developed a craft that would change history. Whether 60 feet long or 120, a warship's keel was carved from the stout trunk of a single oak. With a broad hull and a shallow draft, such ships penetrated far upriver and could be beached almost anywhere. Water, usually a barrier that kept enemies at bay, became for the Vikings a highway to invasion. To them, their vessel was a creature unto itself. They gave it names like Long Serpent and Raven of the Wind. Christian monks indeed saw snakes and dragons flying through the air. Overlapping planks of oak or pine were nailed, pinned, or lashed to the hull. The planks were caulked with tarred animal hair. In rough seas or rainstorms, the ships remained watertight. Under sail, these ships could make 10 knots. Against the swift longship, there was no defense, for the Vikings had mastered not only the element of water, but of surprise. A French monk lamented,
"The Vikings overrun all that lies before them, and none can withstand them."
Before long, Egil had risen to command his own ship.
Once it was manned, they went plundering that summer in the Baltic.
During long stretches at sea, Egil and his crew would pass the time playing board games, such as Capture the King. In their sea chests, the men also carried a number of personal items, not the least their combs.
English women appreciated the Nordic men because they combed their hair, washed every Saturday, and changed clothes often.
After making many raids and winning a great deal of loot, Egil sailed into the Baltic to Courland, in what is now Latvia. For 2 weeks, he and his shipmates traded peacefully. Just as suddenly, Egil changed tack and sailed away to resume plundering.
One day, Egil and his comrades put in near a large estuary that lay beneath a vast area of forest. They decided to go ashore and divide into groups, each of them 12 strong.
The men took up their weapons and headed inland. Egil carried an iron sword more than 3 feet long called Adder, a sleek serpent that unleashed death whenever it struck. It was light enough to wield in one hand, but strong enough that it would not shatter against a shield. Like most Vikings, Egil prized this weapon above all others. Some swords were thought magical, made by dwarves, or bestowed by Odin, god of war. In poetry, the blade was celebrated as the fire of battle and the lightning flash of blood. The poorer members of Egil's crew carried a short battle axe, simple but deadly.
He swung his axe and crashed down on Thrain's head, splitting it down to the jaws and spilling his back teeth onto the ice.
Warriors who could afford to wore an iron helmet, which, despite legend, was never horned. The wealthy girded themselves with mail, made of thousands of interlocking links. And every warrior carried a round wooden shield. The most feared Vikings, even amongst their own comrades, were the legendary berserkers, or bearskins. Named for the bear or wolf skins they wore, these men were endowed with gifts from the gods, powers thought to blunt swords and stop the flight of javelins. From these fanatical warriors, we have the word berserk.
Egil had walked through the forest with his 12 men. Not far away was a farmstead, so they made for it. And on reaching it, they charged into the building. I've borne the blood-stained sword and bitter spear shaft, the raven at my right hand. As we raiders strove forward, burning for battle, we made their barns blaze. Gory at their gates groaned those fast sleepers.
The slumbering farmers were killed in their beds, their possessions looted.
Each man gathered his own load and carried it out. Egil picked up a big jewel case, and with that under his arm, he went with his men towards the wood.
Egil's ship continued on its trail of terror.
Late in the summer, they sailed for Denmark to lie in wait for trading vessels and plunder wherever they could.
So it went, stealing treasures of silver and gold from helpless monasteries and taking slaves from coastal villages. But having amassed great wealth, Viking raiders sometimes chose not to fight, but trade. Treasure and slaves could be bartered for Mediterranean wines, Eastern spices, and Persian leather.
Their most valuable ornaments are ceramic beads, which are kept on the ships. They bargain for them, put them on a chain, and give them to their women as necklaces.
As traders and seafarers, The Vikings left their mark throughout Europe. Russia owes its name to Norse traders called Rus. Normandy, too, was settled by the men from the north. Settlements abroad grew. Vikings brought their families from across the sea and created towns like Kiev and Dublin. Journeying far to the east, Viking mercenaries formed a bodyguard to the Christian emperor of Byzantium. Inside the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, a bit of graffiti proclaims, "Halfdan was here." Most daring of all, the Vikings are believed the first Europeans to have crossed the Atlantic, predating Columbus by 500 years. For Egil, the spoils of battle were plenty: silver, gold, and slaves. But rather than savoring his plunder, he was lured back to sea by the thrill of the raid. As generations of Vikings descended upon the coast of Europe, their reputation spread far inland. When the King of Scotland declared war against the King of England, England's Athelstan sought help from the very Norsemen who had raided his shores. One of his mercenaries was Egil. Because England was a Christian country, Egil first had to be baptized. Then, with 360 fellow Vikings under his command, he joined the English king. Athelstan challenged his opponent to a pitched battle.
It was the custom in those days that once a field of battle had been declared for a king, he could not honorably wage war until the battle had been fought.
At the appointed time, both armies engaged.
Egil marched ahead, urging them forward and brandishing the sword adder, striding in front and hewing men down left and right. He led the men into the thick of the battle, pressing forward.
Egil recorded such battles in poetry.
The warlord weaves his web of fear. Each man receives his fated share. A blood-red sun's the warrior's shield. The eagle scans the battlefield. Then Egil and his troops caused utter havoc by attacking the Scottish king's unguarded flank. The whole column gave way and began to disintegrate, and the Vikings raised the cry of victory.
Toward the end of Egil's life, the Vikings once more came to England. Not in a single longship, but in fleets of almost 100. Not to aid the king, but to conquer his lands. For this race of warriors, death came early through disease or battle. The warrior would be buried with his weapons and perhaps a prize horse or a favored slave girl. His grave would be outlined by stones in the shape of a longship, the vessel that would carry him to the next world. A few might be honored with a monument alongside a footpath. Large stones, marked with inscriptions, would proclaim their deeds. The greatest warriors received the highest honor of all, a boat burial, provisioned with riches for the journey to Valhalla. For Egil, death came slowly.
I flounder by the fireside, ask females for mercy. Time passes tediously. I tarry here alone, an old, senile elder.
For the Viking way of life, too, death came at last. Old victims had grown strong, and old enemies had become friends. The Norsemen in Normandy, even the Danes in Denmark, would become strangers to men like Egil. By the 12th century, Christian Europe had quietly absorbed this race of warriors. With the passing of the Vikings, no more would dragons be seen flying in the sky. No more would good Christians have need to whisper their prayer of 300 years. From the fury of the Northmen, good Lord, deliver us.